I've been writing for a long time since 19, my first book came out in 95. And so this is my 75th book that's out right now. And it seems like, how did that happen? I still, sometimes I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it's really just one deadline at a time. That's basically what you're focusing on that day's words. And that's really what you're focusing on at the time. And that book, getting that one done, and not about the whole 75 books. So the Cafe at Beach End, is basically a beach book by the by the title, you can tell. And it's a little more on the border between romance and women's fiction. There are certainly romantic elements, but it's also a relationship about two women who have had a rift in their lives, and coming together finally by circumstance. One of them is forced to come back and live near the other one, and so and the other one feels very betrayed by some things that happened in their past, and so it's more of a healing story between them, although there are certainly romantic elements in all of my books. I love that part. So that's what the difference between my summer books and my Christmas books. My Christmas books are Christmas romances. That's there are certainly, it is about community and family and things like that, but it really is about the romance. It's definitely less linear. So when you're writing a romance novel, it's a linear story between these two people, from their relationship from the beginning to the end, and how they grow as characters from the beginning to the end. When it's more of a women's fiction story, there are certainly that romantic element, but you're weaving together other things into the plot. And so it's a more complex storyline in terms of, you have to weave in a lot of subplots, and the relationship between other people has as much of a story arc as the romance does. Whereas in a romance, you're just talking about that story arc between those two people. The idea basically came to me because I like to read memoirs, and I like to read these stories when people really dig deeply into their lives and some of the trauma that they've survived, and I had the idea of, what if somebody who lived through that same experience saw it very differently than what someone else did, and someone wrote a memoir about their experience, and the other person was not thrilled about the fact that that's out in the world now, and that their life is now on display for the world as well. And so that was sort of the genesis for that story. So it's about two sisters. One of them has written this memoir about something that happened to them in their past. The other one she thinks she's created this great life for herself now in this little town, and now everybody in this town knows everything that happened to them, and she's horrified by the fact that her sister has betrayed her this way. And so it is about their story, but it's also healing in a lot of ways with the characters in between each other, but also in their other relationships. And that's the highlight of really what women's fiction, how that differs, because there has to be, it's interwoven relationships. And it's the fact that, not every relationship, in fact, no relationship exists in just a vacuum. So even though I like to write the romantic relationship, all these other things come into play when we're saying, we're ready for a relationship, because, you have to have a healing with your sisters, with your mothers, with your friends, with all those things are a component of a story. And so that's about my character arcs. The character arcs that I create, basically in the women's fiction, are more about, how does this person need to heal all these other relationships too?
With something like A Beach House Beginning, um, second chance stories, not judging a book by its cover here, we're talking about Wes Calhoun and, um, you know, kind of the ex-con thing. I mean, there's some steaminess in that too, but it's also like, there's a bit of it seems like two themes playing at once here. What kind of intrigued you about that setup with him and this other character he encounters as his neighbor?
So that one was really fun for me, and it was my final book. I have a series called The Women of Brambleberry House, and I started it like 15 years ago, and I wrote a trilogy in this little house on the Oregon coast, where there's, it's broken into apartments. It's this like three-story house, and there's different apartments that people kind of come and go, and there's like a matchmaking spirit in this house that is just kind of a fun little paranormal element that I don't really say, yes, there's a ghost, but is there a ghost? It's a fun question for the characters. But anyway, and so this was the final one in that 6-book series. And I had introduced Jana, the heroine, in the previous book. And so I really needed to come up with a great hero for her. And so it was really fun for me to kind of think about, okay, this is the last book in the series. How do I wrap up all these elements? Even though they're standalone books, you don't have to read any of them in order at all. But I wanted to sort of, wrap it all up in a fun way. And I just loved Wes and the idea of, again, he served time in prison and for a crime he did not commit. And so he's got that reputation and that stigma from people who know about his past and maybe focus on the fact that he looks rough and he looks hard and not about, the fact that he's actually a really kind person underneath all that. And Jenna at first thinks that she's afraid of him because of her life experience. And then, through the course of the book, she comes to trust him and realize what a wonderful person he is. And so it's healing for him as well as her in that story. You survive however you can survive. That's all it's all about, is surviving and making it through and not being bitter for the rest of your life, especially in his case where he didn't commit the crimes he was convicted of. It was someone he trusted who did that, so not focusing on that bitterness and making that affect every single thing that happens to you in your life. So that one was really fun for me, and it was my final book. I have a series called The Women of Brambleberry House, and I started it like 15 years ago and I wrote a trilogy in this little house on the Oregon coast, where there's, it's broken into apartments. It's this like 3-story house, and so there's different apartments that people kind of come and go, and there's like a matchmaking spirit in this house that just kind of a fun little paranormal element that I don't really say, yes, there's a ghost, but is there a ghost? It's a fun question for the characters. But anyway, and so this was the final one in that 6-book series. And I had introduced Jana, the heroine, in the previous book. And so I really needed to come up with a great hero for her. And so it was really fun for me to kind of think about, okay, this is the last book in the series. How do I wrap up all these elements? Even though they're standalone books, you don't have to read any of them in order at all. But I wanted to sort of, wrap it all up in a fun way. And I just loved Wes and the idea of, again, he served time in prison and for a crime he did not commit. And so he's got that reputation and that stigma from people who know about his past and maybe focus on the fact that he looks rough and he looks hard and not about, the fact that he's actually a really kind person underneath all that. And Jenna at first thinks that she's afraid of him because of her life experience. And then, through the course of the book, she comes to trust him and realize what a wonderful person he is. And so it's healing for him as well as her in that story. So the December Market is my 75th book. I had a great time writing it. I love writing holiday books because I feel like they fit really well with my voice. I tend to write stories about community, about relationships, about families, and what better time? All those things are important to us during the holiday season, and it seems like all of our family relationships are intensified, good or bad, and so there's good and bad that happens during that time. So it's a great time for me to write the kind of stories I love to write, and it fits really well. I love adding those little elements that just make people feel cozy and warm about the holidays. The advice I would offer to other authors who are looking to write holiday romances: look outside of the stereotypes. You want to not do the things that you see everybody else doing. And it's hard at Christmas because all those elements, snow and all those things are an important part of it. But you have to dig deep in your characters to make sure that the characters are not stereotypes and that they can carry a story that does have some of those elements that you can't get away from when it comes to Christmas Eve and Christmas trees and things like that are going to be present in every Christmas book. And so if you build compelling enough characters, you can transcend some of those cliche things about the holidays. Amanda Taylor is a woman who owns a shop in the little town of Shelter Springs, Idaho. It's a fictional town near another series that I've written called Lake Haven, Haven Point. So Shelter Springs is a nearby town to Haven Point. So it's a new series that I started last year with Christmas at the Shelter Inn. And Amanda appeared in that one. She was the sister of the hero of that one. And she had a rough time in her childhood. She had a father who was an alcoholic who caused a lot of pain in their community. He was also a physician and then caused an accident that killed several people in the community. And so she's kind of carried the weight of that, even though it was not her burden to carry, she's carried it. And so she has sort of tried to give back to her community, help her community become a better place. So she runs the every year they do a Christmas market, and she's the organizer of it every year. And because she's this little shop owner, she has her own little booth in this side the Christmas market, but she also runs the whole thing. And so in this particular, she's always told herself this is her focus. She doesn't need a family, she doesn't need romance. She lost her fiance 10 years earlier and decided, that's enough of that. And so when she her grandmother, whom she adores, and I introduced in the first book, ends up dating somebody else who lives in her senior apartment building. Suddenly, Amanda is very concerned about her grandmother and about this, Lothario, this aging Lothario who suddenly has moved in, and his wife has only been gone for like 10 months, and she's like, they can't be ready. They're going to get hurt. So she goes to the grandson to say, we've got to do something about this. He does not agree. His name is Rafe. He's a paramedic in the community, firefighter, and he doesn't agree. He thinks it's great that the two of them are, Birdie and his grandfather have started a relationship. And so it's sort of, there's that dynamic where she's trying to break apart this senior couple, and he's saying, sure, why not? They're great together. And then through the course of it, he has a son who's really cute, who kind of falls for Amanda, and it's kind of their story about how they come together, and she's able to put aside the past to sort of focus on the future and the joy that she can find in the future.